Platformers have been around pretty much as long as gaming has, if you're not including many of the 70s titles like Pong. In fact, Google told me the first genuine platformer is Nintendo's Donkey Kong from 1981. However, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of a platformer? Some of you might say the shooter-focused Mega Man, while others may imagine the vampire-killing Belmonts of Castlevania. I, however, am always brought back to the Mario and Donkey Kong franchises. So for this video's purpose, I'm focusing on 2D titles more similar to my interpretation of a platformer. Now, that's not to say titles like Mega Man and Castlevania aren't platformers, because by definition they are. All of the franchises I just mentioned involve side-scrolling, are level-based, have bosses, and have gimmicks for a given stage. But where Mega Man and Castlevania focus more so on enemy-placed gimmicks, Mario and Donkey Kong's emphasis is on the platforming mechanics. Therefore, I don't think it's fair to make a comparison between the two. That could be a whole other video. So with all that being said, what are some aspects of the most renowned of this genre that make them the best? Well, I recently just completed Super Mario Wonder, which in my opinion is a great game. However, I did feel that there was something off, but I couldn't quite pick it out until I got to the game's closing. If there's one franchise that never disappoints me with its pacing, it's the Donkey Kong Country series. Every level, every world, and every boss continuously gets more challenging, but you only realize this in the subconscious because of how gradual it is. For example, in the original Donkey Kong Country game, things kick off without really any challenge. You can pretty much breeze by the intro world, but by the time you reach Treetop Town, that sense of ease begins to leave you as the barrel blasting becomes more aggressive, along with the increase of enemies. Before you know it, you're at Kremkrock Industries just struggling to get by. I believe every Donkey Kong Country game follows this great sense of pacing. It's a slow learning process that teaches you to get better at the game without actually teaching you. Instead, you're just giving new obstacles and settings to overcome without a noticeably large difficulty spike that could throw you off. On the contrary, Gimmick Special Edition, which is a game I actually made a review for recently, did not have the best pacing. Although it's a beautiful game with some fun gameplay, it really just gets intense right after the first level, which already was not easy. Because of this, it makes you feel like you don't grow in skill with the challenge. I'm all for a difficult game, however, it can be frustrating rather than fun when you don't feel like you were properly introduced to the forthcoming challenge. Although the special edition added features to help with this, the original was made in 1992, only 2 years prior to Donkey Kong Country. The series continued this great sense of pacing in Donkey Kong Country 2, 3, and Tropical Freeze. I have not had a chance to play Returns yet. These titles are so memorable for a variety of reasons, but I think a big part of this comes from that organic sense of progression and pacing. This series also has a fair share of exploration, especially in Tropical Freeze, where you have a surplus amount of items to collect, whether it just be to unlock art or to gain access to new areas. There always needs to be a motive to collect items in platformers, and something that complements this is lives in video games, which I feel are not being used as they should and as they used to be. Do you remember playing Super Mario World and you finally make it to one of the Koopaling castles only to end up on this screen? You're now taken back to the most recently completed ghost house or castle. This is how you're supposed to utilize a life-based system. The issue in many modern platformers is not that lives are dated, it's that they're not being properly utilized. Playing Mario Wonder made me realize that there's no worry of a game over, because I'll be right back at the same level, so nothing's at stake. But what this also does is take away the incentive of collecting coins and allows you to play more sloppily and still progress. In Mario World, however, you have to complete each chunk of levels within your given amount of lives, so you don't have to continuously replay them. Because of this, I'm always going out of my way to collect coins and Yoshi coins to try and attain an extra life, making the playthrough of each given level more impactful. If you do decide to recklessly play through a set and you arrive at one of the later castles, then you're in a terrible position to actually get that save point, so the game forces you to perfect each level in order to progress. I really don't think most people are completionists, so there needs to be a reason to go out of your way to attain these items. Super Mario Bros. 3 also does this, except that the only real checkpoint given is after completing a world. However, this difficulty can be alleviated by opening a shortcut after completing a mid-world castle. Now, this is not a unique feature to the Super Mario Bros. Series. In fact, this was common for most titles all the way up to the 2000s, where it seems lives began to become an afterthought. And it doesn't just need to be lives that give you an incentive to collect, such as gathering the puzzle pieces in Tropical Freeze for the concept art, or finding loot in Shovel Knight to increase the attributes of the knight. But in my opinion, if there's no substance behind a given item, then it might as well not be in the game. So even if you're playing a title with some great pacing and incentives, if the gameplay mechanics aren't enjoyable, then it probably will not end up being a good experience, as one of the most important aspects of this genre is I had not played Celeste in a long time, so for the purpose of this video, I went back and tried to understand what made this game one of a kind. I think in the simplest of terms, it's the movement and gimmicks. Celeste does also have a heartwarming story involving her mental health, which only makes the experience better. But story is typically not a forefront for this genre, and therefore, I don't think that's the sole reason it's such a memorable title. Celeste just feels great to play as. All of the movements are very reactive, you're forced to maneuver around plenty of difficult and unique obstacles, utilizing her abilities to the fullest. Celeste is a much more complicated platformer than some of the titles I previously spoke on, in large part due to her abilities to dash and climb walls. This opens the opportunity for more variety within each level. For example, in Chapter 2, you're introduced to space blocks, in which you learn you can dash through them, but you cannot change your direction. Then in Chapter 3, there's a lock and key system that's different from the more traditional side-scrolling adventure, which is something that Celeste is not. Celeste is more of a room-based game that does not utilize a life-based system because you are expected to die a lot. Understanding good platformers is knowing that one of the most important aspects is the movement, because that is what the player will be doing the entire game. However, if you have great movement but repetitive gimmicks, then that doesn't necessarily mean it will still be a good title. Fortunately, Celeste has both of these, offering new objects, gameplay mechanics, and even chase sequences in almost every chapter. But Celeste also has a soul to it, and that's not just because of the story. If there's one thing that all the so-called great platformers have in common, it's atmosphere. If a game is going to be lacking in story, then it has to make up for it somehow besides just the gameplay, and it seems building a wonderful atmosphere is the answer. Super Mario World has been known for its unique charm over the years. It's significantly more colorful than its predecessors and has a lot more personality than the new Super Mario Bros. Series. You're introduced to new enemies such as the Wiggler, who has gone on to become a staple to the franchise, and Mario World also has arguably one of the most iconic game over screens of all time. Although its environments aren't the most diverse, they each carry a wonderful tune, and really, even if this sounds cliche, the game just has a charm to it that is almost unexplainable. A few years after the release of Super Mario World, we're introduced to one of the best platformers of all time in Donkey Kong Country 2. Now this game has been praised for a lot of different reasons, but to me, the most notable was its incredible soundtrack. This soundtrack sets the tone for the experience across various settings, from the bramble stages to the dark woods of Gloomy Gulch. Now fast forward to 2014, and we're met with the now iconic Shovel Knight. This title introduced something to the genre that, to my knowledge, was pretty much non-existent prior, and that's the overworld NPC hubs. Shovel Knight takes a more open-ended approach in level selection. However, you can select villages from the overworld, which leads you to areas where you can interact with various NPCs. This helps give what would be a standard platformer a bit more life and personality. Obviously, I believe this formula has been successful, considering this has become much more common in platformers since Shovel Knight's release. I've actually reviewed 2 games that also do this in Curse Crackers and Bat Boy. Just to emphasize the importance of atmosphere in platformers, a not so well known title named Indukari Chase of Deception has some wonderful backdrops and tunes. However, the gameplay mechanics are not the most fluid, and there's a lack of incentive to collect anything. But because the atmosphere was so enjoyable during my playthrough, I really was not too bothered with this and enjoyed my experience with the game. In all honesty, I find it baffling that some of the best atmospheres in gaming have come from 2D side-scrollers. However, the same cannot be said for boss fights. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because most titles that I play usually involve boss fights, and almost none of the best ones come from platformers. Some of the greats from the genre such as Celeste don't even have them, so how impactful can they actually be? Does anyone really think fighting the Koopalinks in Super Mario World was the most memorable part of the game? They're all easy, and the difficulty comes from the stages themselves, not the boss fights. If you want to look at modern titles such as Mario Wonder, the rehash fights with Bowser Jr. are not much better in my opinion outside of the presentation. Shovel Knight in the Donkey Kong Country series does much better with their bosses. For starters, each boss you fight in those games are unique from one another in both gameplay and design, so better bosses can impact a title for the better, but they're not necessary for a game to be considered a well-done platformer. Granted, I would be more than happy to see a platformer with an emphasis on bosses, and actually, some of my favorites have come from an indie title called Bell Boomerang. It's an 8-bit game that's pretty straightforward, so I was pleasantly surprised when I realized the bosses were very difficult and came with multiple phases. Now, there's no right answer as to what actually makes a given platformer a good game, but if you look at some of the best qualities of some of the greats, then I think you can get a good idea. Everybody has their own preferences on what they enjoy the most, but the fact of the matter is that most of the titles I mention are pretty universally loved, and there's a reason for that. Could it be the atmosphere, or maybe the unique stage design? It could even just be legacy bias if that's a thing. I don't have a nostalgia bias for any of these, and yet I still enjoy them more than most modern 2D platformers. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'm kind of fidgeting with a new mic that I just got, so apologies if there's some inconsistencies there. But let me know in the comments what you think I might be missing. What qualities do you believe make up for a great platformer and why? So, until next time.